The crystal chandeliers glittered above the dining room of Le Jardin, a fine dining restaurant in downtown Chicago where the wealthy came to be seen. Every table had white linens pressed so flat that the candlelight seemed to glide across them like a stream of gold. Waiters in pressed uniforms glided silently between the tables, carrying bottles of wine that cost more than most people's rent. To outsiders, it looked like perfection, but for Lily Carter, tonight felt like walking into a storm she was unprepared to face. At 23, Lily had been working at Le Jardin for 6 months. She had learned the rhythms of the place, how to anticipate a guest's raised eyebrow or the flick of a hand. But no matter how well she memorized orders or polished silver, she never escaped the way her coworkers treated her. They called her the ghost girl because she rarely spoke unless she had to. Lily kept her head down her brown hair, often slipping across her eyes as if to hide her from the world. She smiled politely, delivered the plates, and blended into the background. That was safer. That was how she survived. On this particular evening, the restaurant had been rented out for the birthday celebration of Ethan Montgomery. The name meant power in Chicago, Montgomery Capital. His company was one of the most successful tech finance firms in the country. Reporters often described him as brilliant but cold a man who had built an empire by 32, yet seemed to find human interaction an inconvenience. Even the staff whispered about him. A billionaire who could buy anything but who carried himself with the kind of distance that discouraged anyone from trying to know him. Lily adjusted her black apron for the 3rd time as she stood near the kitchen doors waiting for assignments. Her palms felt damp despite the air conditioning that kept the dining room cool. She did not want to be noticed tonight. She hoped she would be given a small corner table, perhaps a group of middle managers celebrating with champagne. But fate had other plans. Sarah, the head waitress with 20 years of authority in her voice, glanced at the seating chart and smirked. Table 12. That is Montgomery's table. She handed Lily the note without looking up from her pad. And for heaven's sake, try not to spill anything. A ripple of laughter spread among the other servers polishing glasses nearby. One of the busboys whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Imagine Ghost Girl tripping in front of the billionaire. That would be the highlight of the night. Lily kept her eyes down and forced a small nod. She had learned not to argue. Arguing only gave them more to mock. Instead, she picked up the silver tray, balanced it carefully in her trembling hands, and walked toward the glittering center of the room where the most powerful man in the building sat with his guests. The air seemed to grow heavier as she approached table 12. Ethan Montgomery sat at the head, tall and broad-shouldered, in a tailored suit that whispered Italian craftsmanship. His dark hair looked artfully careless, as if a stylist had spent an hour making sure it fell at just the right angle. His steel gray eyes scanned the room with the focus of a man used to control. Around him sat executives, politicians, and socialites, each vying for his attention. Yet at his side was a girl no one seemed to notice. Sophie Montgomery, Ethan's 10-year-old daughter, sat quietly in her chair. She wore a pale blue dress with ribbons, her hair neatly braided, but her eyes were distant. No one spoke to her. No one leaned down to include her in the conversation. They laughed, clinked glasses, and discussed business deals, while the child stirred her water with a straw. Lily's chest tightened at the sight. She recognized the expression on the girl's face, the practiced stillness of someone who had learned that the world preferred her silence. For a moment, Lily forgot her own nervousness and felt a spark of recognition, a silent bond across the crowded room. She placed the tray gently on the side stand, preparing the glasses. Her hands shook only slightly as she uncorked the wine. Behind her, she heard someone from another table chuckle. "Watch, she will fumble the pour. Ghost girl always does." Lily closed her eyes briefly and exhaled. She reminded herself of the mantra she had carried since childhood. One step at a time, one task at a time. Survive tonight and tomorrow will come. She lifted the bottle, steadying her grip, and moved toward Ethan Montgomery's glass. Conversation at the table dimmed just enough for her to feel every eye waiting for her to fail. She poured with slow precision, the red liquid flowing smoothly, without a single drop spilling. Relief washed through her chest, but the moment of peace was fleeting. She sensed something beside her. The girl Sophie had turned toward her. Sophie raised her small hands and began to gesture her eyes, searching Lily's face with hope. Lily froze. Around the table, someone laughed lightly. Poor child, the waitress does not understand a thing. Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. She had a choice. Keep her head down and pretend she saw nothing as everyone else did, or let the part of herself she had hidden for years finally surface. She set the bottle down, turned fully to Sophie, and her hands began to move. The words formed in graceful arcs of fingers and palms. "Good evening, Sophie. You look beautiful tonight. Do you want to order dessert?" The restaurant air seemed to stop. Conversations faltered. Silverware clinked softly against plates as people turned their heads. Ethan's gray eyes snapped toward Lily in shock. Sophie's entire face lit up with joy, the kind that made her seem to glow beneath the chandeliers. For the first time that night, Lily was not invisible. Ethan Montgomery was the kind of man whose presence commanded attention even when he wished it would not. At 32, he had already built a reputation as one of the most brilliant minds in finance technology, a man who could see patterns in data where others saw only chaos. His company, Montgomery Capital, had grown from a small startup into a billion-dollar empire that managed portfolios for some of the wealthiest families in America. Reporters wrote articles about his strategic genius, his uncanny ability to anticipate market shifts before they happened, and his refusal to tolerate incompetence in his staff. They also described him as cold, a man of marble and steel, someone who valued numbers more than people. In truth, Ethan had learned to project that image because the world expected it from him. He knew that any sign of softness would be read as weakness in the circles he moved in. He wore tailored suits that projected power, his dark hair always styled in a way that seemed casually perfect, and his gray eyes carried the weight of calculation. People rarely met those eyes without feeling a flicker of intimidation. Yet beneath that surface there was another truth, one that none of his business associates ever truly understood. Ethan Montgomery was a father before he was a CEO. His daughter Sophie was the only part of his life that could break through the armor he had built around himself. Sophie had been born deaf. Ethan and his late wife had discovered her condition when she was a toddler, and while doctors offered therapies and devices, Sophie's world remained shaped by silence. Ethan's wife Julia had been her greatest advocate, learning American Sign Language quickly and encouraging Ethan to follow. They had built a home where Sophie's hands were her voice, where love was communicated in gestures and expressions as easily as in spoken words. Then Julia's sudden death in a car accident 3 years ago had shattered that fragile balance. Ethan threw himself into his work, partly to escape grief, partly to ensure Sophie would never want for anything. But the result was that Sophie grew more isolated. Ethan still loved her fiercely, but he often felt helpless. At business dinners and social functions, few people had the patience or ability to communicate with her. Wealthy guests would nod politely at Sophie, perhaps pat her head, then turn back to their champagne. Ethan would try to bridge the gap, interpreting for her, when he could, but running a company and navigating the social maze of elite society often left him stretched thin. Sophie learned to sit quietly, her hands folded, her eyes drifting toward the floor. Ethan noticed it every time. He noticed the way his daughter's smile faded at events where no one acknowledged her existence. And each time it cut deeper than any headline accusing him of arrogance. Tonight's birthday celebration was supposed to be different, at least in theory. His board members had insisted on hosting a lavish party at Le Jardin, arguing that it was good optics to remind investors that Ethan Montgomery was not just a machine, but a man worth admiring. Ethan had not cared for the idea. He would have preferred a quiet evening with Sophie at home, maybe a walk along the lake or a trip to their favorite bookstore. But he agreed for the sake of appearances. He had arranged for Sophie to be seated next to him, determined to make sure she felt included. Yet as the evening unfolded, the same familiar pattern emerged. Guests swirled around him, eager to offer congratulations, to pitch ideas, to boast of their own successes. Sophie sat at his side like a porcelain doll, seen but not heard. Ethan tried several times to sign with her, asking if she wanted sparkling water, or reminding her she could order anything she liked. She responded with small nods, her hands moving hesitantly, as though she felt uncomfortable drawing attention in such a public space. Ethan's frustration grew quietly behind his composed expression. He wondered if it had been a mistake bringing her. He hated that she always had to endure the shallow indifference of people, too self-absorbed to notice her. It was in this state of mind that Ethan first truly noticed the young waitress assigned to their table. He had seen her once or twice before at Le Jardin, a slight girl with brown hair and a tendency to keep her gaze lowered. He remembered that she moved silently, almost like a shadow, and that she rarely spoke unless required. When she approached with the wine, he had expected nothing more than the usual polite service. But then Sophie had lifted her small hands, desperate for someone to acknowledge her, and Ethan braced himself for the awkward moment when the waitress would smile apologetically and pretend she did not understand. What happened instead left him momentarily stunned. The waitress Lily, he would later learn her name, responded in fluent, graceful American Sign Language. Ethan watched his daughter's face transform, her eyes brightening with delight, her entire body leaning forward as though someone had finally opened a door she had been pounding on for years. The room grew quiet around them, the kind of quiet that follows a collective gasp. Ethan's guests stared in surprise, his daughter's laughter silent but expressed in the purest joy. Through her hands, filled a space that had long been empty. For Ethan, it was like seeing sunlight break through heavy clouds. He had never seen Sophie so alive in a public setting. The sight pierced him with gratitude and something more complicated. Who was this waitress who had given his daughter back her voice? If only for a moment, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Lily with intensity. He saw how she smiled genuinely at Sophie, how her hands moved with practiced ease. This was not a casual familiarity. This young woman had studied, had lived with the language. Ethan's mind immediately began asking questions. Why would a restaurant waitress know sign language so fluently? What part of her life had required it? Why had she hidden it until now? Around him the murmurs of wealthy guests grew. Some whispered admiration, others suspicion. Ethan ignored them. His focus remained on the small miracle unfolding at his table. Sophie was signing quickly, now telling Lily about her favorite desserts, about the blue dress she wore, because it reminded her of the ocean, about how much she disliked being ignored by adults who pretended to care. Lily responded patiently, warmly, as though every word mattered. Ethan felt his chest tighten with a mix of relief and guilt. Relief that his daughter had found connection, and guilt that he had not been able to give her this moment himself. He realized with a shock that in the 6 years since Sophie's diagnosis, he had never seen her light up like this outside their home. When Lily finally excused herself to bring the dessert menu, Sophie tugged at her father's sleeve, her hands moving quickly. She likes me. She talks to me. Ethan knotted his throat tight, unable to sign anything in return for a long moment. Then he signed back slowly. Yes, she does. As he watched Lily disappear into the kitchen, Ethan Montgomery felt something he had not expected to feel at his own birthday party. Curiosity. Not the detached kind he usually reserved for market trends or investment opportunities, but a personal, insistent curiosity about the quiet waitress who had just done more for his daughter in 5 minutes than most of his friends had managed in years. For the first time that evening, Ethan Montgomery no longer felt like the center of attention. Sophie was, and he could not have been more grateful. Lily steadied her breath as she approached the table, once more carrying a silver tray with the kind of concentration that made her hands tremble. She had been trained to be invisible, to glide between guests like part of the decor. But tonight, every step felt heavier, as though the marble floor was testing her resolve. She set the tray on the side stand and lifted her eyes just long enough to see Sophie watching her. The little girl's eyes were bright, not with laughter but with an aching kind of hope. The look of someone used to being overlooked, but still daring to try one more time. Sophie raised her hands hesitantly and signed a question. The room did not notice at first. The adults continued their chatter about politics and business ventures, their laughter sharp and polished. But a few noticed the girl's movements, and one man chuckled, shaking his head. Poor child, that waitress will not understand a word. The comment spread like a ripple-quiet snickers at the expense of the billionaire's daughter and the shy waitress assigned to serve them. Lily froze. For a heartbeat, the years of silence pressed down on her. The years of being told to stay quiet, to let others laugh, to pretend she did not feel the sting. But then her eyes met Sophie's, and she saw the raw vulnerability in that small face. It reminded her of sitting beside her own mother in hospital waiting rooms, of the way her mother's eyes pleaded for connection in a world that often turned away. Something inside Lily shifted. She set the wine bottle down, ignored the murmurs, and lifted her hands with a grace that came from a lifetime of practice. "Good evening, Sophie. You look beautiful tonight. Do you want to order dessert?" the signs flowed from her fingers in perfect American Sign Language, each movement precise, confident, alive. The room stilled, conversations faltered, mid-sentence glasses paused halfway to lips. Ethan Montgomery's eyes narrowed in disbelief, his carefully constructed composure cracking. He watched his daughter's face light up with astonishment, then bloom into pure joy. Sophie gasped silently, her mouth shaping a delighted O, as she leaned forward, hands flying with excitement. "You know sign? You can talk to me." Lily nodded, her lips curving in a genuine smile. She had not worn in months. "Of course I can talk to you. Tell me what you would like tonight." Sophie's hands moved rapidly, her small fingers dancing in the language she had long been forced to use alone. "I want chocolate cake. I want ice cream too. And I like your hair. It is pretty." Around them whispers spread. "Did you see that? The waitress knows sign language. Incredible. Unbelievable. Why would she hide that?" Ethan could barely process what he was witnessing. For years he had struggled to bridge the gap between Sophie and the world. He had hired tutors specialists, even tried to force the school board to provide better accommodations. But in rooms like this, rooms filled with power and wealth, his daughter had always been invisible. Yet here was a waitress, a stranger treating Sophie as if she mattered more than the glittering crowd. Ethan's chest tightened with something between awe and guilt. He had never seen Sophie smile like this outside their home. Sophie signed again, her movements so rapid Ethan could hardly keep up. "Do you work here every day? Can you sit with me? Will you come again?" Lily laughed softly, her shoulders easing as though Sophie's enthusiasm gave her strength. "I work here most nights. I cannot sit, but I will come by often tonight. And yes, I can see you again." The sparkle in Sophie's eyes was answer enough. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He studied Lily's hands, the fluidity of her motions, the confidence of someone who had lived with this language all her life. This was not a skill picked up casually. This was part of her identity. Who was she? Why did she hide it under the role of a silent server? His gaze flicked to his guests, noting the stunned expressions, the curiosity, even envy. For once, no one was looking at him with admiration or fear. They were looking at his daughter. They were seeing Sophie, and it was because of the shy waitress they had mocked moments ago. Lily brought the dessert menu, kneeling slightly so she could be at Sophie's eye level. She showed pictures of cakes and sorbets, letting the girl choose while continuing to sign every option. Sophie giggled and signed back, with confidence unbothered by the audience that now watched her with fascination. Ethan felt an unfamiliar heat rise in his chest, pride, relief, and something else he refused to name. When Lily stood to leave, Sophie tugged at her sleeve and signed one last time. "Thank you." Lily signed back. "Always." As Lily disappeared toward the kitchen, the silence around the table lingered. One woman cleared her throat awkwardly. Remarkable talent. A man muttered that perhaps Montgomery had staged it. Ethan ignored them all. His eyes followed Lily until she was gone, and in that moment he knew that something irreversible had happened. A waitress had walked into his carefully controlled world and shattered it with the simple grace of her hands. For Ethan, it was not just a twist in the evening. It was the beginning of a story he had not expected to live. The night of Ethan Montgomery's birthday lingered in the minds of everyone at Le Jardin, far longer than the champagne bubbles that faded from their glasses. By the next morning, the staff of the restaurant were already whispering in corners, their voices tinged with envy and suspicion. Lily Carter, the quiet waitress they called Ghost Girl, had somehow stunned the entire room. The story spread quickly among servers and busboys. Some retold it with admiration, describing how Lily had communicated fluently with Sophie Montgomery and made the billionaire's daughter glow with happiness. Others told it with malice, suggesting there had to be more to Lily than she let on. Why would a waitress in Chicago's most expensive dining room know American Sign Language so perfectly? Why had she hidden that ability until the precise moment when Ethan Montgomery's attention was unavoidable? In a world where gossip traveled faster than truth, the narrative quickly shifted. A dishwasher muttered that Lily must have trained for this moment, that she was ambitious enough to plant herself in Montgomery's path. A hostess rolled her eyes and said Lily probably pretended to be shy so she could play the innocent card. The cruelest theory came from a waiter who sneered that Lily was probably aiming for a lawsuit or a scandal. After all, why else would a girl with education and skill work for tips, unless she was positioning herself for something greater? Lily ignored the stares as best she could, but she felt the weight of every whispered word pressing against her back as she tied her apron for the evening shift. She had learned to live quietly, to let the world underestimate her, but this was different. Now she was not invisible. She was being watched. She considered asking the manager to reassign her to other tables, but before she could find her courage, the manager approached her himself with an envelope. Inside was a business card on embossed stock, the name Ethan Montgomery printed in sharp silver letters. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Please extend my gratitude to your server Lily. If she would like to contact me, here is my card. No pressure." The message was courteous, not invasive. It had been delivered through the proper channel. Still, Lily's fingers shook as she held it. She had no intention of contacting a billionaire. Men like Ethan Montgomery lived on another plane of existence. To him, she was just a momentary novelty, someone who happened to speak the language his daughter needed. She tucked the card back into the envelope and slipped it deep into her locker. Yet that night, when she returned to her small apartment and sat alone at the kitchen table, she took the card out again. Her eyes traced the bold font. Her mind replayed Sophie's laughter, the girl's eager hands, the glow on Ethan's face when he watched them. Against her better judgment, Lily sent a short message. "Thank you for your kind words. It was my honor to serve your table." She expected silence. Instead, her phone buzzed a few minutes later. "This is Ethan Montgomery. Sophie has not stopped talking about you. She would like to see you again. Would you consider visiting us for dinner?" Lily's pulse quickened. She stared at the message, torn between fear and a warmth she had not felt in years. She typed quickly before she could talk herself out of it. "I appreciate the invitation, but I should not. I am only a waitress." Moments later, the reply came. "You are not only anything. Sophie asked me to ask you. Please think about it." At the restaurant the next evening, the whispers grew louder. Colleagues noticed the faint flush in her cheeks, the distracted way she folded napkins. One server leaned close with a smirk. "So the billionaire texted you, did he? Careful, ghost girl. Men like him do not notice women like us unless they want something." Lily bristled but said nothing. The truth was she did not know what Ethan wanted. All she knew was that his daughter had reached for her in a way that felt achingly familiar. Still, she decided to keep her distance. She buried herself in work, avoiding the envelope with his card. Yet curiosity gnawed at her. Ethan, on the other hand, found himself uncharacteristically restless. He sat in his corner office, a skyline of steel and glass stretching behind him, but his thoughts were not on quarterly reports. They were on a young woman who carried herself with timidity, yet had stepped boldly into his daughter's silence. He could not reconcile the contradiction. Who was she really? Why did she seem to vanish into the shadows, yet carry a gift that shone so brightly? By the end of the week, Ethan called his head of security, not to invade privacy, but to request a simple background check. He wanted to know who was spending time with his daughter if Sophie insisted on seeing her again. When the report landed on his desk, it only deepened the mystery. Lily Carter, age 23, no criminal record, high school honors. Enrolled at New York University for 2 years in linguistics before withdrawing unexpectedly. Since then, a trail of low-wage jobs finally landing at Le Jardin 6 months ago. Nothing more. Ethan leaned back in his chair unsettled. A top university linguistics, then a sudden disappearance into anonymity. It made no sense. His instincts as a businessman whispered that there was a story behind those facts, something she was hiding. And in his world, hidden stories were often dangerous. At Le Jardin, the rumors only thickened. The wealthy patrons who had attended his birthday party began telling their friends about the mysterious waitress who had dazzled Sophie. Each retelling added a layer of speculation. Some thought she was a secret tutor planted to win favor. Others swore she must be chasing fortune. The cruelest suggestion was that she intended to manipulate Ethan's grief over his late wife. Lily heard fragments of these stories and felt her stomach twist. She had not wanted any of this. She only wanted to connect with a little girl who reminded her of her mother. Now it seemed she was becoming a spectacle. Ethan decided he needed to hear the truth from her own lips. He asked the manager again to pass a message, this time inviting Lily not to his home, but to a quiet coffee shop away from the glitter of his world. Lily hesitated, but curiosity pulled her there. When she walked in, she found him waiting, tall and impeccably dressed, yet with an expression softer than any photograph in the papers had ever shown. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "I need to understand who you are." Lily stared at the man across from her in the quiet corner of the coffee shop, her fingers wrapped so tightly around her paper cup that the heat seeped through her skin. She had promised herself never to sit in a room like this, never to let someone with power peel back the layers of her past. But Ethan's eyes held no mockery, only the weight of curiosity mixed with concern. She could feel his silence urging her forward. For a long moment she said nothing, fighting the urge to run. But then Sophie's face flashed in her mind, the joy of finally being understood, and Lily exhaled slowly. "I was not always a waitress." She began, her voice quiet but steady. "I once thought my life would follow a different path." She looked past him out the window to the bustling Chicago street and let the memories unspool. Her mother had been deaf from birth, a woman who lived in a world where silence was constant but never limiting. To Lily, ASL had been her first language, the rhythm of her hands shaping words before her mouth had ever spoken them. Her mother had taught her that communication was not about sound, but about intention, about seeing and being seen. Those lessons had carried Lily through childhood with a sense of belonging, even when other children teased her for having a mother who did not speak like theirs. She remembered long afternoons at the kitchen table, her mother telling her stories through signs, stories of courage and resilience of women who carved space for themselves in worlds that tried to erase them. It was no surprise then that Lily excelled in school, driven by a quiet fire to prove herself. She won academic awards, earned scholarships, and by 18, she had secured a place at New York University in the field of linguistics. Her professors quickly recognized her brilliance. She immersed herself in research on language acquisition among deaf children. Her essays cited by classmates, her name whispered as one of the brightest in her year. She dreamed of becoming a professor, of standing in front of lecture halls teaching students, not just the mechanics of communication, but its soul. Then everything collapsed. Her mother, the anchor of her life, fell ill and passed away during Lily's sophomore year. Grief hollowed her, but she clung to her studies, determined to honor her mother's legacy. It was then that her stepfather stepped into the center of her life, a man whose presence had always been shadowed by sharp words and selfishness. He controlled her finances under the guise of helping her manage scholarships and aid. Lily discovered too late that he had siphoned her federal student loans and misused her scholarship checks to cover his gambling debts. The university froze her enrollment when tuition went unpaid. Appeals failed because the records showed her name on the loans. Suddenly, she was branded irresponsible, a promising student who had squandered opportunities. The shame was unbearable. She tried to fight, but legal systems moved slowly, and she had no money for lawyers. Her stepfather dismissed her tears, telling her she should get a job and stop acting superior. She remembered packing her dorm room with shaking hands, the humiliation of explaining to professors that she would not return. She returned briefly to her stepfather's house, but it was no home. The nights were filled with shouting accusations and a constant reminder that she was a burden. She left one cold morning with nothing more than a duffel bag and the little box of notes her mother had written before she died. From then on, survival became her only goal. She took jobs where she could, waiting tables in diners, cleaning offices overnight, standing for hours at retail counters. Each paycheck went to rent and food. She taught herself to live invisibly, to lower her gaze, to avoid drawing attention. The dreams of academia faded into something she kept locked inside. For years, she carried the knowledge that she had once been someone else, someone with promise, but now she was just Lily the waitress. As she spoke, her voice cracked only once when she mentioned her mother's hands, telling her stories in the language of light. Ethan watched her intently, his jaw tightening at the mention of betrayal, his fists curling slightly when she described her stepfather. He felt anger on her behalf, but kept it contained, knowing she needed space to speak. When she finished, there was a long silence between them. She stared down at the cup, ashamed of the story she had revealed. "That is why I keep my head down," she whispered. "People look at me and see nothing more than a waitress. It is safer that way." Ethan leaned forward, his gray eyes searching hers. "But you are not nothing. You gave my daughter something I have been trying to give her for years. You made her feel seen. That is not nothing." Lily blinked back sudden tears. She had not meant to expose so much, yet a strange relief filled her chest, as though releasing the story had loosened a chain she had carried too long. Ethan wanted to ask more about her research about the brilliance her professors had seen, but he restrained himself. He sensed that pushing too far would send her retreating. Instead, he asked gently, "Do you miss it? The life you were building?" Lily nodded slowly. "Every day. But missing it does not change the fact that it is gone. I have learned to accept what I am. A waitress, someone who takes orders and stays silent." Ethan's voice deepened. "That is not all you are. My daughter knows it. I know it. Perhaps one day you will too." Lily looked away, uncomfortable with the intensity of his words. She had told herself for years that love and admiration were luxuries she could never afford. Yet sitting across from this man who carried both power and an unexpected softness, she felt the faint stir of something she had long buried. For Ethan, the evening confirmed what he already suspected. This woman was more than the rumors that surrounded her. She was a story interrupted, a potential derailed by cruelty, yet still carrying the strength to shine when needed. And for Sophie, she might be the friend she had always deserved. As they parted that night, Lily returned to her apartment with trembling hands, but a lighter heart. She had shared her past and survived. She did not know what Ethan would do with the knowledge, but for the first time in years, she felt seen not as a ghost, but as a woman with a story worth hearing. Ethan Montgomery was not a man easily shaken. Boardrooms, courtrooms, and shareholder meetings never rattled him. He had stood before senators and venture capitalists and never once lost his composure. But something about Lily Carter unsettled him in a way that neither markets nor enemies could. After hearing her story, he found himself replaying every detail, the determination in her voice, the pain she tried to disguise, the strength it must have taken to keep going when her world collapsed. That night, as he drove home to his penthouse overlooking the Chicago River, Sophie sat in the back seat, sighing furiously about Lily. She liked her. She wanted her to come over. She wanted Lily to teach her more signs. Not the dry drills tutors gave her, but the living language that flowed like music when Lily's hands moved. Ethan promised nothing, but he knew already he would not be able to refuse. The next week he reached out again through the restaurant manager, extending an invitation to dinner at his home. At first, Lily declined. She insisted she could not cross that boundary. But Sophie, stubborn and persuasive, sent a message through Ethan that melted her resistance. "Please, you are the first person outside my family who talks to me like I matter." Reluctantly, Lily agreed. She told herself it was for Sophie's sake, not for the billionaire who watched her with eyes that saw too much. The Montgomery residence was a world apart from the cramped apartment Lily returned to each night. Glass walls overlooked the lake, art hung in hallways, lit with soft recessed lights, and the scent of polished wood carried a warmth that money could not buy. Sophie greeted her at the door with excitement, immediately tugging her toward the living room, where piles of books and games were scattered. Lily laughed, setting aside her nerves, and soon the two were immersed in rapid signing, Sophie's laughter bubbling like water from a spring. Ethan stood at a distance watching them, a strange ache tightening his chest. He had brought investors to this home business partners, rivals he needed to impress, but never had the house felt so alive. The soundless conversation between his daughter and the young woman lit corners of the room long dimmed by grief. He poured wine and joined them, hesitant at first. then gradually drawn into the orbit Lily created. She slowed her signing to include him, encouraging him to practice the gestures he often forgot. When he stumbled, Sophie giggled and corrected him, and Lily's eyes softened with encouragement. For the first time, Ethan felt less like a CEO performing fatherhood and more like a man simply trying to belong. After Sophie went to bed, Ethan walked Lily to the door. The air between them carried a tension that neither wanted to name. Her eyes were downcast, her hand clutching her bag strap, as though to anchor herself, but her cheeks carried a faint flush that betrayed what words would not. Ethan spoke quietly. "Thank you for tonight. I have not seen Sophie so happy in years." Lily nodded. "She is a remarkable girl. She deserves to be seen." Ethan studied her, tempted to ask if she had any idea how remarkable she herself was, but he swallowed the words. He had no right, not yet. Yet the nights multiplied. Sophie begged for Lily's visits, and each time Ethan told himself he invited her for his daughter's sake, not his own. But with each shared meal, each conversation over coffee in the kitchen, after Sophie's bedtime, the boundary blurred. He found himself listening more closely to Lily's voice, noticing the way her hair slipped over her shoulder, the curve of her lips when she smiled at something Sophie signed. Lily felt it too. She caught herself glancing at Ethan, startled by the warmth in his eyes. When he looked at his daughter, surprised by the gentleness beneath his reputation for steel. She scolded herself afterward, reminding herself of the gulf between them. He was a billionaire, powerful, untouchable. She was a waitress, barely paying rent. Whatever stirred in her chest was dangerous. Still, the moments kept piling up. One evening, as she helped Sophie with homework, their hands brushed when both reached for the same pencil. The jolt that ran through her made her pull back instantly, but Ethan's gaze lingered, his eyes darker than usual. Neither spoke of it, but the air between them was charged. At the restaurant, whispers about her continued. Some staff suggested she was being groomed as a mistress. Others speculated Ethan would discard her soon. Lily tried to ignore it, but the cruelty sliced deeper than she admitted. Yet each time she saw Sophie, her doubts weakened. She could not abandon the girl who clung to her with such fierce affection, and each time she saw Ethan, her resolve grew shakier. One night after Sophie had fallen asleep, Lily lingered in the kitchen, washing dishes as a way to delay leaving. Ethan joined her, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled to his forearms. The image startled her, stripping away the armor of wealth and revealing simply a man, tired yet present. They stood in silence until Ethan finally spoke. "You are not what they say you are." Lily froze, unsure how much he had heard of the gossip. He continued, voice low. "People will always try to fit others into boxes. Waitress, billionaire, worthy, unworthy. But what I see does not fit any of those." She turned to him, her chest tightening. "And what do you see?" His eyes held hers, unwavering. "I see someone who makes my daughter believe in herself again. Someone who makes me believe too." For a moment, time held still. Then Lily stepped back, shaking her head. "You should not say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it is dangerous. Because it makes me forget who I am." Ethan's voice was steady. "Maybe you are more than who you think you are." She wanted to argue, but her words tangled. She grabbed her bag, muttering that it was late. Yet as she walked into the night air, her heart raced with a dangerous hope. She tried desperately to deny. For Ethan, watching her go, the truth settled like a stone in his chest. He was already falling for the waitress with the shy eyes and the fluent hands, and he feared that nothing could stop the pull. Ethan Montgomery had built his empire on a single principle: trust but verify. It had saved him from bad deals and from competitors who smiled in public while sharpening knives in private. So when his attraction to Lily Carter deepened beyond anything he had prepared for, instinct told him to know more. She had told him pieces of her story, but gaps remained, and in his world gaps were dangerous. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed and Lily had left, Ethan sat alone in his office, staring at the lights of the city. He dialed his head of security with a request that left him uneasy. Find out everything you can about Lily Carter. Not to hurt her, I just need the truth. Within days, the file was on his desk. At first, the facts aligned with what Lily had shared. High school honors, admission to New York University, linguistics major, stellar grades, professors who had praised her as a rising star. Then sudden withdrawal, no degree, no explanation. Ethan's chest tightened as he read. Financial records showed student loans defaulted. He frowned, scanning further. Strange activity appeared. Credit lines opened under her name, debts accumulating, then disappearing into the void of her stepfather's schemes. It looked messy, potentially scandalous. Ethan's instincts screamed caution. He did not want to believe Lily had been careless or deceitful, but patterns on paper did not lie easily. The next evening at Le Jardin, the staff whispered even louder. Word had spread that Montgomery had taken a special interest in Ghost Girl. One server told a patron that Lily had attended a top university and mysteriously dropped out. Another hinted she was working angles to secure a wealthy husband. Lily heard fragments, her chest aching as if her ribs were too tight. She had worked so hard to stay invisible, and now invisibility was gone. When Ethan asked her to step outside with him after dinner, she sensed the storm in his eyes. They stood beneath the awning where the city's hum filled the silence between them. Ethan's voice was quiet, but edged with steel. Why did you leave NYU? Why are there debts in your name? Lily's face went pale. Her heart hammered. I told you my stepfather. He cut her off. I know what you said, but do you expect me to believe you had no control over your finances? That someone as intelligent as you simply lost everything and walked away? His words sliced deeper than the rumors. Lily's throat tightened. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I chose to become a waitress after spending my life studying? I was 19 and he stole everything. He ruined my chance to fight. Ethan's jaw clenched, and yet here you are in my home with my daughter, as if nothing ever happened. How do I know this is not another angle? The words hit like a slap. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. So that is what you think of me? That I am using Sophie to get to you? Ethan's silence was damning. Lily stepped back, her hands trembling. I thought you saw me. I thought you understood. But you are just like the rest. Her voice broke. You see what is convenient and nothing more. She turned and walked away before he could stop her. For a long moment, Ethan stood rooted, torn between his instinct to protect his daughter from any risk and the knowledge that he might have just destroyed something precious. In her small apartment, Lily collapsed against the door, tears spilling freely. She had been foolish to believe she could belong in their world. She had broken her promise to herself never to open her heart again, and now she was paying the price. At home, Sophie sensed the change immediately. She asked her father why Lily was not coming anymore. Ethan tried to sign an explanation, but his hands faltered. Sophie's face crumpled, her small fists pounding the table. She shut herself in her room, refusing to come out. For days, the house was filled with silence heavier than usual. Ethan sat awake at night, replaying his words, haunted by the look on Lily's face. When she realized he doubted her, he told himself he was right to be cautious. But the truth gnawed at him. He had built a fortress around his life to keep danger out, and in the process, he had pushed away the one person who had given his daughter joy. Meanwhile, at Le Jardin, Lily resigned. She handed her apron to the manager with shaking hands and walked out without saying goodbye. The staff exchanged glances, some smug, others quietly regretful. Ghost Girl had vanished again, but gossip never sleeps. Rumors twisted into sharper knives. Some said Lily had run off with money. Others claimed Ethan had discovered she was lying about her past. The cruelest whispered that she had been nothing but a manipulator who had finally been caught. Lily tried to drown it out by taking shifts at a diner far from downtown. She kept her head down and her hands busy, but inside her chest felt hollow. Nights were the worst. She missed Sophie's eager signing the way the little girl's laughter had filled her heart. She missed Ethan too, though she hated herself for it. The memory of his eyes when he watched her with Sophie would not fade. She told herself it was over, that she had been foolish to dream. Yet destiny had a way of circling back, and the storm she thought she had left behind was only beginning to gather. The autumn air in Chicago carried a bite as Lily hurried from the diner to the bus stop, her thin jacket no match for the wind that whipped between the high-rises. She kept her head down, clutching her worn bag, close hoping to escape the whispers that seemed to follow her everywhere. She had grown used to being invisible again, but this time the invisibility was laced with shame. She had walked away from Ethan and Sophie, from the only flicker of belonging she had felt in years. And though she told herself it was for the best, her heart refused to believe the lie. Meanwhile, in Montgomery Capital's gleaming offices, Ethan was fighting battles of his own. Victor Hale, a name that made every seasoned businessman wary, had begun circling his company like a vulture. Victor was charming, sophisticated, with a smile that convinced many to trust him, but Ethan knew his reputation. Hale built wealth not through innovation, but through manipulation. He had ruined smaller firms, buried rivals in lawsuits, and left wreckage wherever he went. Still, his offers were tempting. He came to Ethan with promises of expansion into global markets of partnerships that could double Montgomery Capital's reach. Ethan's board urged him to consider, reminding him that in business sentiment had no place. But Ethan's instinct screamed that Victor's deals were poison wrapped in gold. It was during one of these tense meetings that Ethan stumbled across an unexpected thread. Victor Hale's financial history intersected with the name of Daniel Mercer Lilly's stepfather. Old loan records, debts, and settlements revealed connections. Ethan froze as the realization hit. Hale had been the lender who fed Daniel Mercer's addictions, the very trap that had stolen Lily's scholarship and future. Suddenly, the mystery of Lily's downfall was not just personal, it was tied to the man now pressuring Ethan's company. The discovery twisted inside him a mixture of fury and regret. He had doubted Lily accused her of deception, when in truth she had been a victim of the same man, now threatening him. While Ethan wrestled with the decision, Victor made his presence felt in other ways. He began showing up at events, always with a glass of wine and a calculated smile. He made pointed remarks about Ethan's private life, about the mysterious waitress who had captured his daughter's affection and then disappeared. The insinuations spread through the press thinly veiled gossip about Montgomery's judgment. At the diner, Lily recognized Victor one night as he walked in with a group of associates. The moment her eyes landed on him, her stomach turned to stone. It had been years since she had seen him in person, but she knew. The slick hair, the sharp suit, the gleam in his eyes. It was the man who had bankrolled her stepfather, the man whose loans had chained her family. She ducked her head, praying he would not notice. But Victor's gaze was like a spotlight. He smirked as he caught sight of her. Well, the Mercer girl, or should I say the ghost of her. What a surprise! His words dripped with mockery, audible enough for his table of companions to hear. Lily stiffened, cheeks burning. She wanted to disappear, but her body rooted to the floor. One of the men laughed. "You know her?" Victor chuckled. Once upon a time, she thought she would be a scholar. Brilliant, they said. But money has a way of telling the truth about people. Look at her now serving coffee. The humiliation clawed at Lily's throat, but beneath it burned anger she had buried too long. She clenched her fists, forcing herself not to respond. Later that night, she walked home trembling, her mind a storm. It was not just personal shame anymore. Victor Hale was circling Ethan's company, and if Ethan trusted him, everything including Sophie's security would be in danger. The thought of Sophie's bright face, her trusting eyes, snapped something inside Lily. She could not stay silent. The next day, Ethan sat in his office, staring out at the skyline when his phone buzzed. The message was brief. "I need to see you. It's about Victor Hale." It was signed by Lily. His chest tightened at the sight of her name. Hours later, she arrived at his office, hesitant but determined. Ethan rose from behind his desk, every muscle taut with conflicted emotion. They had not spoken since the night he accused her, and the wound between them still ached. Yet the fire in her eyes told him this was not about them. She sat opposite him and told him everything. About her stepfather, about the loans, about how Victor Hale had been the man behind it all. Ethan listened in silence, his gray eyes darkening with each detail. When she finished, he leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I should have believed you," he admitted. "I let my fear make me cruel." Lily shook her head. "This is not about us. This is about Sophie. If you work with him, you are handing him the same power he used to destroy my life. He will do the same to you." The weight of her words settled heavily. Ethan knew she was right, but rejecting Hale outright would spark retaliation. The man had influence in places few dared challenge. Ethan studied Lily for a long moment, admiration mixing with regret. "You did not have to come here," he said quietly. "After what I did, after what I said, you could have left me to fall. Why did you?" Lily's voice wavered, but held firm. "Because your daughter deserves better. She is the only reason I am here." For a moment the room was silent except for the hum of the city beyond the glass. Ethan felt the walls of his carefully constructed world shifting. The woman he had doubted had walked back into his life, not for herself but for his child. The realization cut through his defenses as Victor Hale tightened his grip on the business world and whispers in Chicago grew louder. Ethan knew one thing with certainty. The battle ahead would not be fought with numbers alone. it would be fought with truth. And Lily Carter was now entwined in that truth, whether either of them liked it or not. The ballroom of the Chicago Hilton gleamed with chandeliers and polished marble, the air humming with the low murmur of investors, politicians, and journalists who had gathered for the unveiling of Montgomery Capital's new global initiative. It was supposed to be Ethan Montgomery's crowning moment, a declaration that his company was ready to expand across borders with a strength unmatched. At the center of the stage stood a sleek podium draped in navy silk behind it, a towering screen that bore the Montgomery logo. To the crowd's delight, Victor Hale circulated like a predator in tailored charcoal. His handshake warmed, his laughter loud. He spoke of partnerships and opportunities, painting himself as the indispensable ally to Montgomery Capital. Ethan stood near the stage, his jaw tight, his gray eyes cold as steel. He knew this night was not just about business. It was a battlefield, one he could not afford to lose. But as he scanned the glittering crowd, his mind kept returning to the conversation with Lily, her warning about Hale's past, the conviction in her eyes when she said this man had destroyed her life. Ethan had not slept since that meeting. He had weighed every option, every strategy, and realized the only way forward was not silence but exposure. Yet the stakes were monumental. If he accused Hale without proof, he risked his company and reputation. If he stayed quiet, he risked losing everything anyway. The sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter faded as the lights dimmed and the spotlight turned toward the podium. Victor Hale strode forward, smiling like a man who had already won. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "tonight we stand on the edge of history. Montgomery Capital and Hale Global will," his voice cut off mid-sentence. The side doors of the ballroom opened and all heads turned as Lily Carter walked in. She was no longer in her waitress uniform, but in a simple navy dress that made her look both fragile and unshakably resolute. Every eye followed her as whispers rippled through the crowd. "Isn't that the waitress? What is she doing here?" Ethan's heart stopped, then surged as he realized what she was about to do. Lily's heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked directly to the stage, her hands trembling but her chin lifted. She climbed the steps before anyone could stop her. Victor turned, his smile faltering. "Miss Carter, this is not your place." She ignored him, turning instead to face the audience. "Good evening," she said into the microphone, her voice clear though her pulse thundered. "I know many of you wonder why a waitress stands here tonight. The answer is simple. Because truth belongs on this stage, not just money." A murmur spread, confused but intrigued. Lily drew in a breath and then did something that silenced even the skeptics. She raised her hands and began to sign. Her fingers moved with practiced eloquence, each gesture sharp, fluid, undeniable. "For those who cannot hear me," she signed, "this is for you. For the children who are ignored, for the families broken by lies." Sophie Montgomery, seated near the front, sat forward, her eyes wide, her hands rising instinctively to mirror Lily. The crowd turned to watch the little girl signing in perfect synchrony with the woman on stage. A hush fell over the room, heavy with the weight of something real. Lily's voice and hands moved together, now weaving a story that could not be dismissed. "Years ago," she said, "my stepfather was ruined by loans, designed not to help but to trap. Those loans came from Victor Hale. He exploited desperate families, pushed them into debt, and then used the wreckage for his gain." She reached into her bag and produced documents, copies of contracts and payment records she had uncovered signed with Hale's name. This is proof, not rumor, not accusation, proof. The crowd erupted into gasps and shocked whispers. Cameras flashed as reporters surged forward. Victor's face darkened, his charm cracking. Lies, he barked, his voice harsher than anyone had ever heard. She is a disgruntled employee, a girl with nothing to lose. Do not believe her. Ethan stepped forward, then his tall figure commanding silence. Enough, his voice was sharp, cutting through the noise. I have verified what she says. Victor Hale is not a partner, he is a predator. Every eye turned to him. He looked directly at Lily. His gray eyes filled not with doubt, but with pride. I made the mistake of doubting this woman once. I will not do it again. She speaks the truth. Victor lunged forward, hissing through clenched teeth. You think you can survive without me? I will bury you. Ethan's lips curved into a cold smile. Try, but tonight everyone sees who you are. Security moved swiftly, escorting Hale out as the crowd shouted questions and reporters scribbled furiously. On stage, Lily stood frozen, her chest heaving. The weight of what she had done threatened to crush her. She had stood against the man who destroyed her past. She had risked everything in front of the most powerful people in Chicago. And then Ethan was beside her, his hand steady at her back, his presence grounding her. You were brave, he murmured. His voice meant only for her, braver than anyone here. Her eyes met his, shimmering with unshed tears. I was terrified. He shook his head. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is what you did in spite of it. Sophie broke free from her chair and rushed forward, leaping into Lily's arms. Her small hands signed rapidly, I am proud of you. I love you. The room softened at the sight, the hard edges of business and politics, giving way to something undeniable. Reporters who had come for numbers and forecasts now scribbled words like redemption and courage. The crowd erupted in applause, not for wealth but for truth. In that moment, Lily Carter was no longer the ghost girl of Le Jardin. She was a woman who had faced the monster of her past and refused to be silent. Ethan looked at her, his heart thundering with a clarity he could no longer deny. She had saved his company, yes, but more importantly, she had given his daughter hope, and she had given him something he had thought forever lost faith. As the applause rolled through the ballroom, Ethan took Lily's hand. For the first time, he did not care who watched. He held her hand firmly openly, a silent vow that this was only the beginning of their story. The night after the confrontation, the city's headlines blazed with one story Victor Hale exposed at Montgomery Capitol Gala. Photos of Lily standing on the stage with Sophie by her side flooded every news outlet, her hands caught mid-gesture, her expression fierce and determined. For once, the story was not about wealth or scandal, but about integrity and courage. Victor Hale tried to deny everything, of course. He released statements, hired lawyers, shouted slander in the press, but the evidence Lily had provided was too strong, and Ethan's legal team moved quickly. Within weeks, investigations were opened, federal agents reviewed contracts, and Hale's empire began to crumble. He was no longer the predator in control of the room. He was a man cornered, desperate, and exposed. For Lily, those weeks were a whirlwind. Overnight, she went from anonymous waitress to the woman who stood up against corruption. Journalists begged for interviews, nonprofits for partnerships, universities for lectures. But Lily avoided the spotlight as much as she could. She was grateful, yes, but fame was never what she wanted. All she wanted was peace and the chance to build a life that finally belonged to her. Ethan noticed this. He shielded her whenever possible, stepping into cameras, redirecting questions, ensuring she could breathe in a world suddenly too loud. Sophie clung to her, constantly introducing her proudly to classmates as the woman who spoke her language. And in the quiet moments when the chaos faded, Lily and Ethan began to discover each other beyond crisis. At first, it was dinners at his home, Sophie chatting excitedly in sign language as Ethan tried to keep up with the lessons Lily gave him. Then it was walks by the lakefront, where Ethan confessed he had not smiled so much in years. Slowly, Lily's walls began to lower. She let him see her laughter, her quiet resilience, the parts of herself she had buried under years of fear. Ethan, in turn, revealed the man behind the billionaire mask, a widower who had been lonely, a father terrified of failing his child, a man weary of shallow relationships built on his money. Together they found something unexpected understanding. 6 months later, Victor Hale was formally indicted for fraud and racketeering. Lily's stepfather was also arrested on charges of financial manipulation. For Lily, it felt like chains breaking one by one. She no longer had to look over her shoulder, no longer had to fear the ghosts of her past. She was free, and with freedom came a choice. She could disappear again, start over somewhere far away, or she could finally embrace the life she wanted. The answer came to her one afternoon as she watched Sophie struggling to teach a friend the alphabet in sign language. The friend grew frustrated, and Sophie's shoulders slumped until Lily knelt beside them and guided them gently. In that moment, she realized her path was clear. She wanted to create a place where children like Sophie could feel seen, heard, valued. And so, with Ethan's support, she opened the Chicago Center for Sign Language and Deaf Studies. At first, it was a small rented building in a quiet neighborhood, but quickly it grew. Parents brought children who had struggled in silence. College students volunteered, businesses offered funding. And at the center of it all was Lily. Not as a ghost girl, not as a waitress, but as a leader and teacher. On the opening day, Ethan stood beside her pride, shining in his gray eyes, as Sophie tugged at his sleeve, signing Daddy. "This is the best day." Reporters asked questions, cameras flashed, but Lily barely noticed. Her eyes were on the children, laughing as they signed to one another, a soundless conversation full of life. 1 year later, the center celebrated its anniversary with a small ceremony. The building was decorated with paper lanterns crafted by the children, each one painted with words like Hope, Family, Future. Margaret Montgomery, Ethan's mother, attended too, her silver hair gleaming under the soft lights as she hugged Lily tightly. "Thank you," she signed with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for giving Sophie and me a voice in this world." Lily smiled, her heart swelling. The ceremony ended with applause and cake, and as the crowd dispersed, Ethan pulled Lily aside. His hand trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket. He had faced boardrooms, hostile takeovers, billion-dollar negotiations without flinching, but now he looked almost nervous. "Lily," he said softly, "this past year has changed everything for me. I thought I had it all, money, success, reputation, but I was empty. Then you walked into that restaurant quiet and shy, and you changed my life. You gave Sophie joy, you gave me hope, and you gave us both a reason to believe in love again." He dropped to one knee right there in the center's courtyard, the paper lanterns glowing around them. Sophie gasped and clapped, signing excitedly as she bounced on her toes. Ethan held out a simple velvet box inside a ring that gleamed in the light. "Lily Carter, will you marry me? Will you let me spend my life proving that you are not invisible, that you are extraordinary?" The crowd that remained fell silent, waiting. Lily's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the man before her, the daughter who had become like her own, the mother who had embraced her. For the first time in years, she felt whole. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Ethan." A cheer erupted, Sophie throwing her arms around Lily's neck. Ethan slipping the ring onto her finger with hands that shook only from joy. They stood together in the soft glow of lantern light, a family forged not by chance, but by courage, kindness, and love. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the center was quiet, Lily and Ethan stood hand in hand watching Sophie chase fireflies in the yard. Lily leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked softly. "At a restaurant where everyone laughed at me." Ethan kissed her hair gently. "They laughed because they did not see you, but I saw you, and I will never stop." Lily smiled, her heart full. She had walked through fire and come out whole. She had faced cruelty, lost betrayal, and emerged stronger. And now she had love that was steady, a daughter to cherish, a purpose to guide her. The world would always laugh at someone, dismiss someone, try to silence someone. But Lily Carter knew the truth now. The truth that kindness, resilience, and love would always be louder in the end. If you are still here with me after this journey, then you know this was never just a story about a shy waitress or a billionaire. It was a story about all of us, about the moments when the world points and laughs, when people reduce you to nothing more than background noise, when they underestimate your worth, until you finally dare to show the strength they never imagined you had. And that is why I want to leave you with this. If Lily Carter could walk through humiliation, heartbreak, and betrayal, only to find her voice, her courage, and a love that saw her for who she truly was, then maybe tonight you can remind yourself that your story is not over either. No matter how broken or invisible you might feel right now, there is always a chapter waiting to be written, where you rise, where you fight back, where you are seen, and where love, whether it is from a partner, a child, a friend, or even yourself, finally takes root. And I need you to take this feeling with you when the video ends. Do not just watch and move on, but pause and ask, what would it look like if I believed I was worth fighting for? What would it mean if I trusted that kindness and truth will outlast lies and cruelty? Because that is the heartbeat of this story. Not the wealth, not the glamour, but the reminder that every person has a voice that matters, even if others try to silence it. So if this touched your heart, if you felt even for a second that spark of hope, I ask you to share this video with someone who might need it tonight. Maybe a friend who doubts themselves, maybe a loved one who is struggling in silence, because sometimes one story is enough to remind us that we are not alone. And if you want more stories that lift you up, that remind you that romance and redemption are not just fantasies, but possibilities, then stay with me, subscribe, comment where you are watching from, and become part of this Soul Stories family. Because every time you engage, you are not just supporting a channel, you are keeping alive a space where people believe, in second chances, in love after pain, in laughter after tears. And I promise you there are so many more stories to tell. Stories that will make you cry, laugh, and above all believe again. So do not close this chapter alone. Join me in writing the next one together. Because like Lily and Ethan discovered, sometimes the people who laugh at you in the beginning will have no choice but to watch in awe when you finally stand tall. And maybe your story will be the one that inspires the next person to rise.